Now we will speak about the chapter, which in my opinion is one of the most annoying ones when it's about defense. And also when we have to defend, we have to take life important decisions, because if we defend in a not sufficient way, we will lose the game. When we speak about defense and decision making things, when it comes to defense, what we should know, of course, is the active defense is always the best defense. So before we look for a passive move to solve the problems, we should look for active ones. And here we have the position of the game between the two strongest chess ladies in the world. I mean, let's skip Judith Polgar because she's not playing chess anymore. But Hu Yifan and Zhu Wenyun played a very interesting game back in 2017. Hu Yifan was white, and she is obviously to see a little bit in trouble because her king is very weak. There are threats like queen b2 check and queen b1, and c2 is falling. There might be some issues around the back rank, so d3 and queen g1 could be some mating patterns, or queen b5 with the idea of mating on f1. So the situation currently is not very good, and it's clear that if white is slow in its approach, there is no chance to save the game. So the first thing we should look for is moves which cause really bad threats, so mating threats, because the king currently on h7 doesn't have much squares. To be precise, the king on h7 has 0 squares. So the first move we should check is, of course, queen f8, because we threat checkmate on h8, and d3 is not available as black needs to take care of the mating threat. Now the question, of course, is like, why do we threat a mate on h8? Very simple. King g6 doesn't work as there is a pawn on f5. So that leads us to the first candidate move we already have seen beforehand. Queen b2 check, king d1, queen b1 check, and queen takes c2, followed by queen takes f5. And I would say white lost a little bit too many pawns to be happy about. So that means queen f8 we can easily dismiss. Now we should try to find other solutions, because since like black has at least 3 threats, it's very hard to come up here with a silent move. So the question should be, do we have another mating threat? Before we get to the move I'm speaking about, sometimes it helps, well, if you don't see what you should see, or if you feel that there should be something and you don't see it, it's good to anyway go for all the typical moves you should watch out when it's about calculation. For example, moves with a check. So rook h8 is a move with a check, which of course here after taking on h8, queen f8 check and king h7 doesn't lead nowhere. Of course you can try f6 and threat a checkmate, but here the whole thing is a little bit too slow. However, already here this is going to be interesting, because we see that it's very difficult to defend g7. In this current position, however, like black has the move queen b2, king d1, queen b1, king e2. I give a check, and then I have queen g6, and everything is solved. But when we look at this kind of pattern or this kind of sequence of moves, to which first candidate move does that lead us? By just checking out a move like rook h8, which you can feel doesn't work, yet it gave you a very important information about the mating pattern, which is connected to g7. So when it's about just changing the move order, why not start with f6? The idea is the same: check, check, and mate. Now let's see what black can do. If black gives a check, takes and plays now something like queen c6. The difference is like I can take on c6, which was not available in the previous line when the rook on h8 was already sacrificed. So here queen takes c6 is easy enough and everything is fine. Which means, objectively speaking, after king f3, black has nothing better than to give perpetual check, something like queen d3, king f2, and here not queen g6 but queen c2, and the game will end up in a draw. This was the way, of course, saving the game, but f6 unfortunately was missed by Hu Yifan. Hu Yifan played queen d5, which was against queen b5, as one idea, and which of course also attacks the knight on c6 and on f7. So the sequence with queen b2 check is not so attractive anymore, because, well, the problems here would still remain once the queen is on c2. But here, as I already mentioned, there's a third move in this position, which is d3, and it's unfortunately strong enough because black threats checkmate on g1. White had to take, because if you take with a pawn, there is check and mate on d2. So white had to take on d3. Now knight b4, creating additionally 3 more threats. You cannot take on c3 because of knight takes a2. There is queen g1 and knight takes a2. So it's horrible, well, when you see that you have to cope for all these things. Who played queen e4? Because she needs to have queen e1 in case of a check. So the check was played by Juvenile. Queen e1 and now queen g2 with a mating threat on c2. Here, who answered with queen e4, which actually lost the game immediately after queen d2, followed by queen d1 mate. I think another good try could have been queen e2, because at the first glance it's not so easy here what to do. I mean, for example, like knight takes a2 looks very tempting, as king b1 fails to queen b7 and mate on b2. But here after king d1, for example, queen h1 check, queen e1, queen d5 check, something like king e2, there's a check on b5, and there's also a capture on f5. It's not so crystal clear how the position is. I think black objectively should have the easier game, but not so clear. And here, instead of knight takes a2, because that's why I always tell you, you should look for all kind of candidate moves, not only one. After queen e2, instead of knight takes a2, we can also give a check, for example. Now queen d1 doesn't work, as there's a check, and queen b7. So queen e1 is forced, and usually in such positions silent moves are golden moves, and queen b7 is very strong, because we actually remain the threat of knight takes a2 and queen b1 on the board. Plus, if the rook moves from the e-file, you have the other issue about the back rank and stuff like this. And here, actually, queen b7 would finish the story, but it's not an easy move to find and to see, and especially when you don't have time, I think it's almost impossible. Yeah, anyway, going back to the initial position, queen d5, wrong choice, wrong decision by Hu Yifan, and probably she didn't see the pattern with f6, and that's why in such a position, before we look for the passive defense, which are usually like quite prophylactical moves, we should really look for all the 4 sequences. And if she had just watched out for rook h8, queen f8 and f6, she may have seen the whole pattern and would have come up with f6 eventually. Who knows? But in general, when it's about defense, it's one of the most difficult topics in chess, and you have to take a decision. The first thing you should do, look for the active decision before you look for the passive decision, because every passive decision gives your opponent additional time to increase the pressure, whereas the active decision would basically turn the whole thing and would give the pressure to your opponent, because he will be the one who has a heartbeat jumping up.